Over my shoulder, that very phrase is captured by today's New York Times. Do you think that today's 24/7, 365 sports media establishment would embrace Gene Tunney versus what he had to contend with the 1920s news media?
I think that they would understand it a lot better. I think the New York Times would embrace it. They embraced Gene in the 1920s. I think they would probably embrace him now. I think so, because there tends to be a larger percentage of the population who are better educated and maybe might appreciate the mental aspect a little bit more than before in the 1920s, when basically I think that there was a negativity about intellectuality, if you want to call it that, or mentalizing the sport over being physical. But so I do think that today he would be more appreciated if he were to live by the fighting fans. Yes, I do.
Over your shoulder is a beautiful portrait of Gene Tunney and Shaw. Where is that taking place?
This was taking place in 1929 in the beautiful island of Brioni. And that's an archipelago of about 14 different islands, with one big island, which is the island that they're on. It was part of Yugoslavia. In those days, in the 1920s, it was part of Italy. Mm-hmm. And then the First World War broke it up, and it changed hands. First it became Yugoslavia under Tito, Marshal Tito, and then the Second World War it became part of Italy then, after the Second World War. And then it became part of Croatia. After it was first Yugoslavia after the Second World War, and then Croatia. And that's what it is today. It's Croatia, and it's Tito lived there for 35 years. It was his private residence. He knew a good place when he saw one, and he kept everybody off it, and he didn't see anybody. And it's just one of these special places. And what Croatia would like to do is open it up to, of course, tourism today, if they could. And when the tourists discover it, they will come flocking.
There must have been a great deal of subjects covered between the two. If you had to identify the topics, the top three that would probably be in their conversations, what subjects would they be conversing on and pontificating and challenging one another?
Well, I think first it would have been boxing, but it went beyond boxing in time when they got to know each other very well. They discussed literature, they discussed music, classical music, and I think that probably was one of the things that Shaw particularly is not known for by the people. I think he wrote as many pages of music criticism in his early days as he wrote plays. He wrote 53, 54 plays, total of about 2,800 pages of script. And but Shaw was probably the clearest writer, the greatest music critic, and he used to sing to Dad on the island when they walked on Brioni, showing him the difference between composers like Handel and Richard Wagner and Richard Strauss and people like that, so that Dad could get a handle on the way these different composers sounded. And they even met Richard Strauss on the island, and Shaw introduced Dad to Richard Strauss. It was a marvelous moment for Dad, because he found himself in between the greatest, the writer of the age and the greatest composer of the age, and he was just a little boxer. And yet all the newsmen that were on the island would come running to Gene Tunney to hear what he had to say, because he was the flavor of the month, the celebrity of the month, if you will. Just had retired as champion of the world. And it was so amusing. That was a very amusing aspect of it. But Shaw and Dad used to talk about literature. Shaw talked to him about Einstein. He talked to him about Samuel Butler, the man who wrote The Way of All Flesh. He talked to him about Shakespeare, William Shakespeare. And Dad would be all ears, and he would absorb these lessons, this outdoor teaching, if you will, coming from Shaw. And he flattered Shaw by the way he would take it all in and then get his notebook out and take, like he was learning to be a writer, which he was actually wanting to become a writer. And Shaw told him to go write his first book and write a second book, his autobiography called Man Must Fight. And he gave him that kind of encouragement with the literature, because he was so flabbergasted that this fighter would have such an appreciation for literature, and then be able to approach it the way he approached boxing, an achiever. He would never quit. He would go after each book and memorize words, and he would just eat it up like a wolf. And that was Dad's way of doing everything, because he knew he had to approach life like that, total dedication, and through a self-discipline that was like iron. Mm-hmm. And he simply had to approach life that way, otherwise he wouldn't get ahead. He didn't have the education, and he knew that it was his will that was going to do everything for him, and his discipline, and his powers of concentration. And Shaw was the same way. Shaw himself didn't go through more than 15 years of school. Mm-hmm. He quit, and he became an autodidact and one of the great self-educators, self-learners of all time.